Actually, recently earned my PhD this past October from one of the labs here that's affiliated with CFAR. And I am now transitioned into the role of a postdoctoral fellow, but in the same lab that I completed my PhD in. A neurobiology lab, and it's housed in the School of Biological Sciences and run by Dr. Michael Yausa. Our lab is quite large. I think we have over 20 graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, staff, and that's not even counting all of our undergraduate research assistants. So we're quite a big group and consequently have varied interests, but they all revolve around the central mission of understanding the neurobiology of memory, how memory is represented in the brain, and how it can go sort of awry during different stages of life, like during aging, as well as in the presence of diseases like Alzheimer's disease. My research questions are very focused on how Alzheimer's disease manifests in people with Down syndrome. So we're a human neuroimaging lab, meaning that we use tools like MRI and PET to look inside the brain in a living person to understand what changes are occurring to the structure, to the brain anatomy, as well as things like the organization of the brain, how it's functioning, in real time, and how that's related to the Alzheimer's disease pathology. So I've been looking at some of my discoveries during my PhD have shown that the changes in the brain structure, so we call this neurodegeneration, so loss of tissue. This is occurring in people with Down syndrome who have Alzheimer's disease sort of on the later end, like toward the later stages of the disease, while other maybe more subtle changes to the let's say like the organization of different brain regions, how strong are they, how strongly is their communication, how easily are they able to kind of send signals back and forth. Those changes to the organization in certain key networks that support memory, this is happening earlier in the course of the disease, in what we call mild cognitive impairment, and even sometimes before any clinical symptoms have emerged. So this is kind of getting us an idea of the timing and sequence of different brain changes that occur during Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome. And this can help us better understand, where kind of diagnose where is someone at in the disease and what are the most effective or appropriate interventions for someone in that disease stage. Yeah, so during college, I was a psychology and neuroscience major, so I was always very interested in the brain, particularly in aging and Alzheimer's disease. And after I graduated, I worked for 2 years as a post-baccalaureate fellow at the NIH, the National Institute on Aging. And there I got to work with an amazing, very rich longitudinal data set that focused on older adults who are neurotypical, so not those with Down syndrome, but sort of general population. And I got to work with some really cool neuroimaging data there to try to understand the natural history of Alzheimer's disease, which you can do, using prospective observational data in humans. We can't really experiment so much in humans, it's not really an option for us, but what we can do is study people over time and try to understand, what happens, what disease processes happen when, and knowing the sort of eventual outcome, be able to look retrospectively, look back in time and see what changes were happening before this person was diagnosed with, let's say, Alzheimer's disease, that kind of predicted that change, whereas in someone else, they didn't show this change and they stayed, cognitively normal. So this kind of gave me an appreciation for this type of data. So it felt like a very natural transition to then try to study Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome using the same framework. someone who played a very important role in my PhD is Dr. Elizabeth Head. She was a co-advisor to me. I'm housed in this lab where we focus on Alzheimer's disease in neurotypical folks. I really didn't know very much about Down syndrome. And Liz is, a pioneer in this field of neuropathology and Down syndrome, as well as in Alzheimer's disease. And so she was really able to teach me the foundational knowledge that I was missing, that really enabled me to ask the research questions that I asked and really understand, Down syndrome as sort of a related, but still like different model than I was really used to studying in neurotypical individuals. Gave me a really good appreciation for that. And Liz, I mean, her research speaks for itself. She's made such tremendous contributions to the field, is such an amazing leader. But, I find she also really lives her values. She really embodies them. Something that's incredibly important to her that I got to witness firsthand is her commitment to mentorship. And she does this, not just me, it's with all of her students. You really feel like you get one-on-one time with her. And she also is such a, steadfast advocate for patients. And I just, so admirable. And I just look up to her so much. What really helped me is to read. Just reading every paper that you can come across that's related to your field. It's especially helpful when you're new to a particular area of research to kind of get a feel for kind of the lay of the land. What is the state of the literature in my area of interest? What do we already know or have good evidence to show is probably true? And what are the open questions? What is still left to be discovered? And which, that's where you come in, that's going to be, as a new researcher, that's where you're going to flourish, is answering those unanswered questions. So I would start with some solid review papers. These are generally, they give you a good summary of where we're at and kind of pose those questions that still have yet to be answered. And when you start with those review papers, they often cite the most, either the first or the most influential original research studies that kind of led us to these sort of broader conclusions. And then you can use the references in the review to then start reading those original papers and then get more kind of granular ideas about how to set up your experiments or how to, plan your analysis. And then the second part of this advice is take really good notes. I have a document from during my PhD, I took notes on every paper I read, seriously, every paper, because your PhD is several, it's 5-6 years. You're going to forget the papers that you read at the beginning by the time you get to the end. And if you have this document, you can search for your notes. You don't have to spend time rereading papers. And I used that heavily when writing my dissertation. So and that was advice that was given to me by Mike, my mentor, my advisor. And I'm really glad that he gave that to me. So I want to pass that on. This is such a cool center. It really is so unique in many, many respects. But I think the part of the mission that stands out the most to me is the emphasis on outreach. Outreach was a really big part of my graduate experience, trying to connect community members to the science that we're doing here on campus. And I think that there are a lot of great centers all over the country, but I think that that's the element that really makes CFAR-DS stand out. There are the leaders within our organization have such strong ties to the community, and they build these sort of reciprocal relationships where it's not just us asking for our community or people with Down syndrome and their families to come volunteer for our studies, because we need their participation. We couldn't do the research without them. But at the same time, we now owe it to our community to have them reap the benefits of this research and get to know what we're learning, so they, can use that information, in their decision-making about their health and their activities. So I think just having these ties to both national and local community organizations is so essential, and having the trainees, having a culture of engaging with outreach, as this is sort of part of being a scientist, of being a good community advocate. So that's, for me, that really is the one standout part of our center's mission.